Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 32 of Circle of Fellows. It's a monthly get-together with some IABC Fellows talking about the association's editorial theme of the month. This month, that theme is skills that communicators are going to require in order to thrive and succeed, either as consultants or as communicators representing organizations in the next few years. And we have a terrific panel. We're short one right now, but hopefully he'll be able to join us in just a couple of minutes. But we can get started with this august group. And I'm going to let y'all introduce yourselves. The order I'll use is the order I see you in the thumbnails in my Hangout window. And Angela, that puts you first.
Hi, I'm Angela Sinickas, and I have my own consulting firm, Sinickas Communications. I specialize in doing research and measurement. So you can bet that some of the skills I'm going to talk about are research and measurement related.
I would imagine. And Mary Ann, you're next.
Okay, good, because I see Mary next, but that's all right. I'm Mary Ann McCauley, and I wear two hats right now. I'm both a consultant with Catalyst Communications, my own consulting firm of several years. And I specialize there in strategic planning now, particularly for nonprofits. So one of the things that's important to me is not only Angela's research and measurement, but it's what do you do with that information once you gather it? I also am executive director of the Washoe County Medical Society. So I'm dealing with a very interesting audience right now.
And it looks like you have IABC conference badges hanging from...
I do. David Kissel and I discovered that we're among those who save them. I don't know why. It's just kind of fun to look at them. And so I moved them to Minnesota, from Minnesota to Reno a couple of years ago. And they're hanging there. They're kind of fun to look at.
Add another one to the stack in just a couple of months.
That's right. I'll be in Montreal.
And Mary.
Yes, Mary Hills. I am in Chicago and a principal at Hyman Hills Marketing Group. Like Angela, we do a lot on the research side, analysis, and then obviously the how to figure if you actually got there. I also serve as adjunct faculty in Loyola of Chicago. Their recently released Global Strategic Communication Master's Program. So, and that is a master's program that was informed by the large corporations in Chicago and the research done there and what they said that they wanted communication professionals to come out in. So that's where my input will probably be from in terms of what employers are looking for in communication practitioners.
Terrific. And we're also waiting for Jim Shaffer, who is experiencing some difficulties joining the Google Plus Hangout on air, but we'll cross our fingers that he's able to work that out. Did I introduce myself? I'm Shel Holtz. So. I'm Director of Internal Communications here at Webcor, a commercial contractor in California. I also manage the FIR Podcast Network, where the podcast version of this Circle of Fellows is hosted each month. And our topic, I think, is a good one. I've been looking forward to this one. It is competencies, as Jim wanted us to say. The official description from IABC talks about skills. And we'll jump into that as soon as I let those of you who are watching live know that you can ask us questions or share your observations. Just use Twitter and the hashtag COF32. I'm monitoring it on a second screen right now, and I'll be able to pass your questions or your comments along to Angela, Mary Ann, and Mary. It was very timely that on April 12th, USC Annenberg School of Communication published their annual report on the state of communication. And one of the things that the respondents to this survey included is their ranking of the top 10 skills PR pros believe are necessary for their organization's success. So since this just came out from Annenberg, and it's kind of hard to ignore them as an authority, I thought we'd start there. And the very first thing, the one that got 89% of the respondents saying this is an important skill, is strategic planning, which is a little gratifying for me since I'm going through a strategic planning process right now, which includes, Angela, research. But is it the number one skill? Is it the top thing? How important do you think strategic planning is?
Well, I think it's huge. Of course, that's my pet project, because if you don't know where you're going, you can have all the best writing skills, you can be good at measurement, but if you don't know what to do with it, doesn't have a lot of value.
I would agree as well. Hyman Hills is an alliance member of the Center for Strategic Communication Excellence. And I think the key thing with strategic is, the integration component, that we look at everything. And entities, if we look at the global standard out of IABC, right, that says the purpose of a communication professional is to be the voice of the entity, well, then I think you naturally follow that you have to be in strategic comms in order to represent the voice of the organization. So, but I think, Shell, something else, and I happen to see that Annenberg thing as well, but another model that came out in 2016 is the Communication Value Circle. And it gets into the competency of business acumen among practitioners as well. But I think one of the key things, and it fits right in with strategic comms, is the whole interplay between the internal environment and external environment. And, that is so key to understand what is the business unit doing, what is the business organization, the entity itself, but how does that play out in the marketplace? And, you follow the same analysis, whether you're talking a local market or a global market. So, the kind of process is the same. So you can move in and out of different size organizations, different types, whether they're for-profits, not-for-profits. But strategic comms and the planning enable all of us to kind of do that. So it really gives you flexibility as a professional.
And I think that's true, because I think it gives you the critical thinking skills that not all communicators have. If you really do well with strategic planning, you become a strategic thinker, and you apply that process that Mary was speaking about, even to project things, tactical things, so that the whole quality of what you're delivering is escalated based on that ability to be a strategic thinker and therefore be able to plan.
So if I could jump in, I also agree that it's really critical, but I think sometimes we don't fully understand what strategic planning really means. And I know myself, the first time I developed a strategic communication plan after a 3-day-long strategic planning workshop, what I did is I developed a communication plan to tell employees about the company's strategic plan. And I thought I had a strategic communication plan.
This had to be a long time ago.
Well, yeah, it was. I'm not going to say how many, but it was a really long time ago. So, I'm a fellow, so I must have been around for a while, but I'm not going to tell you exactly how long. Let me just say it was 5 years into my career.
There you go.
So what I learned, though, is that to really be a strategic planner or strategic thinker, it's not only connecting what you're communicating to the business plan itself, but to figure out how do you help make that business strategy fulfilled. In other words, which employees need to do different types of things to fulfill different parts of that strategy. And if you're doing external communication, it would be the similar thing. You to break out which types of customers or potential customers need to do very specific types of things in order to help fulfill different strategies. But this is where I think research begins, is once you identify who those people are and what it is that they need to be doing, then you're going to be ready to come up with those strategic messages and pick the strategic channels that will get you there. But you really need to do some research to understand what is it that people need to know in order to do the right thing? And also, what is it that they need to believe or agree with or feel strongly about in order to do the right thing? So I think we need to be sure that we're really doing strategic planning, not just communicating about a strategic plan.
Yeah,
I see that Jim is.
Jim has joined us. Hi, Jim. It says Ann on your thumbnail, but
Can you hear me?
Can hear you just fine. Glad
Oh,
you
good, good. I'm sorry, I had another problem like I did last time.
You need a new computer, I think.
Something like that.
Angela, I think you made an excellent point, and I used to have this argument with a writer who writes extensively about IABC. I think you probably all know him, and he always argued that the word strategic was just something that consultants used in order to be able to charge more. And my argument
there might be some truth to that. Yeah,
it depends on how strategic they actually are. But I came back to him and I said, look, this isn't rocket science. It just means that you're communicating to achieve a specific outcome, as opposed to just throwing stuff out there. And his argument was, well, internal communications is supposed to be the journalism that is done inside the organization, so employees know what's going on. Isn't that the outcome that you're looking for?
No,
it's not, right? It's addressing the things maybe that are keeping the senior leadership awake at night. It's solving some of the problems in the organization. And Jim, now that you've joined us, I know that when we talk about skills and competencies and addressing business issues, you come at it from an angle that I think a lot of communicators might be surprised by.
Well, I come at it from the standpoint that when you use the word strategy or strategic communication, that means you are there to help execute the business strategy. And the things that I have been harping on, and I did an IABC piece on this just this month, about the four competencies that I think a lot of communication people need, is to help them sort of get out of the pit and focus on several things. Number one is business and financial acumen. A whole lot of people that I talk to, and when I ask people to raise their hands if they're familiar with open book management, have no idea what I'm talking about. Yet it's the most pure form of communication in an organization. I talk about strategic advisor skills and change management issues, as in managing communication not about change, but to change. Leadership development. Get involved. Don't worry about the tactical stuff as much as you worry about building leadership capabilities as a strategic advantage in the marketplace. And then finally, we need to help people get out of the bogging down that social media is doing, and helping them get to a place where they can really focus on eliminating communication breakdowns that are impeding performance. If they do that, they're going to start to see results change as a result of the work that they're doing. So I'm very much in favor of them doing strategic things, but they got to understand that if they're spending $1, they better be getting at least $1.50 back for what they're spending, or they're not contributing to the organization. They could be draining value.
And interestingly, Jim, we had started off by noting that the Annenberg School was out with its global study, and it includes the top 10 skills PR professionals believe are necessary for their organization success. And business literacy, the other things that you mentioned, aren't on that top 10 list. Are not. The closest we come, I think, is first of all, leadership is listed there. It's the number 2 most voted on skill at 84%. And when you get down toward the bottom, 77% said crisis management, which I guess it dips its toe into change a little bit. But like I said, I think that's as close as it gets.
You get to do a lot more crisis communication if you haven't done strategic planning.
Oh, yes, you do.
Together.
But the other thing about
baptism by fire, yeah.
Well, this also gets back to what Mary was saying, that if we don't start thinking strategically about both internal and external, regardless of which audience our jobs have us focus on, I think then you have the opportunity to find yourself in some crises as well. To that point, Mary, and something I've done everywhere I've worked, and I've just started it here, is a weekly sort of editorial call with everybody doing communication in the organization, whether it's PR or recruiting or marketing or whoever it might be. What are you doing that if you didn't tell us today would catch us by surprise, when that press release went out or whatever, and that's important. But the number 4 item on the Annenberg list is social media. And I think because so many crises get, they go viral through social media, but also here, in my role doing internal communications, I have found that about half the people following our social media accounts are employees. So even though it's an external channel, it can certainly be brought to bear in communicating internally. But let's go back to the second one on the list, leadership. Why do you suspect that's a skill that PR pros think is necessary? Is it leading the PR organization or being part of the senior leadership of the organization? This one, it's not that I disagree, it just confounds me a little bit. Just up there with the leadership label.
I think a lot of it has to do with what I said a little bit ago, and that is helping leaders in a different kind of way. I'm working with a client right now who the communication people have been the ones who wrote the stuff for the leadership team, and I'm not suggesting that isn't something that's helpful as being a former speechwriter to a governor and a number of congressional candidates. But that is important, but I think what they really need to be doing is building the leadership capability in the organization so that leaders know how to be leaders. And I think if you have good communication people, these people ought to be able to help counsel leaders, coach leaders, help them avoid say-do gaps and a lot of other things that we're helping leaders with all the time. I don't know why we don't have more people stepping up and trying to do that. I think that's the important part. Let's help our leaders, coach them, counsel them, give them the skills and knowledge to improve their competencies so we improve our leadership capability.
So I'm guessing that the leadership that they're looking for there, at least for a lot of those people, would be how for themselves to be seen as leaders within the organization as opposed to order takers.
Yeah,
that's where I'm thinking, when you first said that was what came to my mind.
Well, yeah, I think I agree with you, Angela. I think part of the issue is it's coming from Annenberg, which is a communication school. Not all of Annenberg is, but Rebecca Weintraub and those folks are not coming from a business school perspective. They're coming from a journalism school perspective.
Before we continue with the list, I have a question. This is from IC Collective, if you're familiar with the internal communications resource that Lisa Michaud runs up in Canada. The question is, generally speaking, are the models currently in place? For example, university programs, associations like IABC or other teaching organizations responding to future competency needs? Are there important aspects that will require more attention?
You know what, I can speak to the way the Loyola Master's Program, and it's in Global Strategic Communication, was informed. And to the point that we just were talking about, it wasn't asking the industry what were top things. It was asking organizations and organizational leaders what was going to be needed from the communication profession. And I think that that's the insight. Several years ago, we did the value of accreditation study. And it was the first time we weren't looking at how accreditation just helped the professional. We were looking at what was their contribution and advancement and progress in an organization. Well, it would seem that, that should be a natural thing that we should be aligning with all of the time. So, and then I think overall in terms of the association, I know the career roadmap research that IABC did, probably about 6-7 years ago now. One of the things that came out of that research was the development of the business leader and the competencies that would probably be required Now, again, the research is 6-7 years old. And a lot of that was taken, again, from global research and organizational work. So the call is out there. And I think some programs are responding. I think other programs are not responding, and they're kind of getting stuck on the shiny object of social media, where I think the call is greater than that, far greater than just social media.
I know we're going to jump into leadership two circles from now in great depth, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, the third item listed in the Annenberg ranking, and it's actually tied for second place with leadership at 84%, is written communication, which, you can look at two ways. One is, well, wait a minute, that's just a tactic, right? I mean, isn't video communication and audio communication, visual communication equally important? But on the other hand, as a communicator, I think if you can't write, it's just a non-starter. I'm glad to see this ranked as high as it is, especially with the sort of de-emphasis that we're seeing on writing in education.
I think that's true. I was thinking about that this morning, Shell, prior to this discussion, that as much as things change, some things stay the same. And one of them is, I think you have to be a very skilled writer, not just being grammatically correct, but knowing how to tailor information to your different audiences and for the different venues. People do get stuck, I think, on the next shiny thing related to social media in particular. But if you haven't got good content and it's not structured or formatted appropriately to the audience and the delivery tool, then you're not accomplishing anything. Lou Williams had a fortune cookie at an IABC conference one time, and it kind of relates back to that whole thought. It's that communication is the guardrail along the highway, not the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And I think you say that. God love and rest in peace, Lou.
That's right. Yeah.
That I think the same thing could be said about competency as a writer. If you're not a competent writer, nothing else will work for you.
And I remember talking to someone who was looking for a communication staffer, and she said it was actually very easy to go through the huge number of resumes that she received in order to figure out who to interview. She just looked at the ones that were well written, because the resumes that were awful with all kinds of mistakes and really not having the audience in mind. And so they said it's actually much easier than she thought it would be.
I think if you can't articulate a concept in words, claiming that you are a communicator becomes a challenge.
You know what? And Shell, I have to say, that's a word that always comes to mind for me when you talk about writing and communication, that ability to articulate. And I think that one of the things that you have to be able to do as professionals, not only do we produce communication, we consume communication and information as well. And I think that ability to listen or to assess news to find out if it's authentic, logical, or in fact fake, I think that we just believe it when it's in print. And I think what you really have to do is, and it gets back to those critical thinking skills that Mary Ann brought up when we were talking about strategic comms. You have to, every single thing that crosses, your path, you have to be able to consume information and then organize it. And that becomes part of the process of articulation. So I think that we have, and that takes time. Things take time to incubate. New concepts, we don't organize them. We think about them inductively at first, and then we come back and we organize them. And that's the process of articulation that is taking place there. So it's not the fast hit and hit the enter and it's done. It really is about understanding the value that you can put in by doing the critical thinking process.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was working with a large pharma not so long ago, and they were asking for a new curriculum. How are we going to develop our people at different levels? And we created what I referred to as a needed to play set of competencies, and that's just to get into the game. Writing certainly would be one of those.
Oh, yeah.
And then the needed to win were the other ones, the kinds of things that we were talking about earlier about the financial acumen and strategic advisor skills and things like that. But I don't think you can dive into that higher level needed to win category of competencies until you have some of the fundamentals down that needed to play.
All right. Well, the fourth on the list, I've already sort of telegraphed this, is social media. And I certainly don't want to dismiss this. I do agree that people tend to chase a shiny object, but as a category, social media is no longer a shiny object. For a lot of people, it has become a fundamental day-to-day means of communicating and engaging. There are people for whom it is the only way to stay in touch with people that matter to them. I agree that I don't think you can be a communicator today without understanding social media, how to use it correctly in ways that appeal to the audiences that you're trying to reach and in ways that engage them.
I agree with you, Shell. There's a piece of it that troubles me, though, and that is that I'm writing an article that's going to come out next week for a different organization, and one of the conversations is about social media, and it's also talking about the difference between activity-based communication versus results-based communication, which I think one or two of you know that I tend to think we ought to be focused on results. If we aren't getting a return on our investment with on-time delivery, quality, service, speed, whatever it is, then we're probably draining the organization. The social media, I contacted the websites of 10 different social media organizations the last couple of days, and I read about what they do and the results they create. They aren't creating results. They're creating process. They're distributing information. It's the digitization of the newsletter. And the concern that I have is that in our, whether it's call it a shiny bright object or whatever, the fact is that we have so many people gravitating toward it and getting bogged down in it, the time-consuming nature of it, but they're not producing any more results. It's like the Clydesdales at the after the Super Bowl. Did it sell beer? No, but it sold a whole lot of likes, and they won the contest or the ad meter. But they changed that advertising immediately after the Super Bowl. They never run that again because that's to get likes and visits. It's not to sell beer. So we got to remember that what we're trying to do in our business, if we're a profit-making organization, is if it doesn't sell beer, then it probably is not working. And that's what I would say about the 10 different organizations I checked out yesterday. None of them, in fact, most of them talk about engagement, not in terms of cognitive identity or discretionary effort. What they're referring to it as, did somebody click on it? Did somebody like it? Mm-hmm. That's not engagement. It may be to them, but it isn't to the people who are in the finance department of your organization.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something, though. Oh.
Go ahead, Angela.
I was just going to say briefly, there is a really bright side, though, to all the social media that people have jumped on board on, and that's all of the metrics that automatically come with that you don't have to pay extra for. And communicators have started getting their feet wet with measurement. Now, as Jim said, sometimes they're looking at the wrong clicks, like just likes or something like that. But when they're starting to look at things like shares, or they could promote stories that they find relevant to them, they're actually then saying that we read it, it was useful, and I want other people to benefit from this. So there are some of these numbers that are more useful than others. But communicators have gotten comfortable now with looking at numbers. And I was really heartened. There's an article in the PRSA Strategy and Tactics this month. They actually focused on employee communication. And there was a communicator who said that they had switched their member communication publication to an app. And by looking at the numbers, I'm going, yay, they looked at numbers. They found that after several months of heavy promotion and doing everything they could to make it as easy as possible to use this app, only 0.002% of their members were now reading the publication. And they had much, much higher numbers when they used to do it a different way. And so they actually used the numbers and said, maybe we need to do something differently. So that there is that bright side, is that we did start getting familiar with looking at numbers and percentages and talking about that with management. And I think that's a great jumping off point for doing just what Jim's talking about. What's making a difference? What should we be measuring?
One of the things I wonder about with social media is how fast are those things going to change? And is one of the competencies that we need to develop and nurture as communicators is the ability to keep that in mind and to track it and to always know where our audiences are and when they move on. I don't think some of the newer things that are yet to be developed will have the lifespans that Twitter and Facebook have had. My sense is they're going to change much more rapidly, and therefore our stakeholders are going to bounce from venue to venue to venue. And if we're not paying attention, we're going to be left communicating in one venue and they're over here someplace else and are gone.
Yeah, and getting back to Jim's point, I see a lot of case studies, usually through entries in communication competitions, where they start with a goal and employ social media in support of that goal. And among the metrics they're able to produce at the end is not just impressions and things like that. Impressions drive me crazy. We used to call it opportunity to see back in the print days. But they're actually able to talk about brand lift and aided and unaided recall and even correlate to sales based on the fact that there was nothing else going on other than this campaign that would account for that boost in sales. So again, I think if you use it strategically, it can deliver those kinds of results. The other thing we need to be doing, though, is monitoring. What are people saying about us? Because, the need to put focus groups together, which I'm not going to dismiss as a still useful tactic. But oh my goodness, there's a worldwide focus group going on 24/7 out there, and if they're talking about you, your industry, your product category, you should be aware of what they're saying and prepared to either jump into that conversation or take some sort of other action in order to either capitalize on something positive or correct something that's not.
Let me just give a quick idea of how you can quickly monitor that. It's very time consuming if you were actually to do a human analysis of all the commentary. But if you copy all of the words that are on a thread of discussion and put them into a free program online for creating word clouds, you very quickly start seeing what some of those key themes and words are. I mean, we literally did this with one client where they had to move to a new headquarters. And just by doing that analysis of all of those words in a word cloud, the words that came out really big were move, went well. Just the message came right through. Then you can look at all the detail for what those themes for why it went well. But it costs nothing. But that is also research. It's looking at what's there. But the one caveat, Shell, is that there is this giant focus group going on, but it's not necessarily a focus group of all of the players or all the different perspectives of an issue. It's people, number one, who are very active on social media, which might have a skew towards age or gender, depending on the industry. But so when you're doing something like focus groups or surveys, you do purposely get a more random selection to see what the whole balance of conversation is. So it's a great thing. You don't want to ignore it, but it also is not the full picture.
It's not, but it is being posted publicly for the world
Absolutely.
to see. Comes up when people are searching on your company name or your brand name. I can't ignore it. Next on the list is multimedia content development. Drew 79% of the respondents. And I agree, we need to know how to do this. We can't ignore the fact that people are looking at videos and GIFs and memes and infographics more and more because they can do it quickly on their phone and move on. So, if this is the kind of content that people are consuming, we certainly should be skilled, if not at producing it, at managing people who do.
I think the one precursor to the discussions when we start looking at social media or multimedia or anything else, if we get back to just the principles and the global standard. Do your stakeholder analysis. What, who are important stakeholders? What do they need to know, right? I mean, this is simple, put it in a little matrix and get it done. And then look at, the advancement and contribution that you are asking from them as part of the discussion. Because when we're talking multimedia and we're talking social media, we're talking an exchange, right? We're not just delivering information. We're developing an exchange, a conversation. That's what we're trying to get to. And you want to have those conversations with the stakeholders that are high priority and have the importance and influence to the topic or issue that you're talking about. So, you can talk about all these things, but the precursor is to do your homework and figure out the stakeholders that you really need to pay attention to. And I know we were all thrilled when social media came out, because you know what the reality is, and I think we're all kind of in the same age group here. There were times we could not address a full stakeholder menu when we were doing communication. We didn't have a budget for it.
Right.
And so we kind of really had to just, oh my gosh, it can only be this, it can only be that. Social media came around and it was like, holy smokes, this was like a free barbecue. We could suddenly get to all these stakeholders that we had never been able to touch. And then we kind of just started moving everything over. And I think it gets back to understanding that stakeholder analysis. If there's a highly important stakeholder group, you really still need to use something other than social media, because that's what it calls for. So I think as long as you keep in mind when we're talking about these kind of things, do your precursor homework, get the stakeholder analysis done.
Don't we keep coming back to that strategic planning thing over and over again?
Over and over. That's right.
Well, one of the things I'm hearing us talk about here continues to be process, whether it's multimedia, social media, stakeholder analysis, I think the infatuation is on process and activity and not on results. What is Annenberg recommending? And I'm not sure that they got a great reputation, but I think that they are more communication people than they are business people in that school. And what I'm wondering is how much time are we focusing on selling more beer or improving cycle time or on-time delivery? We have huge communication breakdowns that go on all the time. They're causing customers to be unhappy. What are we doing about that? We're worried more about, is this little tactic working or is this tactic working here? And we're not directing it correctly. I think that's why a lot of communication people have the reputation that they have. We'll go to them when we want them to write something for us. We won't go to them when we've got a significant business issue.
Well, let me run down the rest of this list.
That would be a good idea to know the perspective of the other ones.
Right. So just running down the bottom five, 78% said data and analytics are an important skill. Crisis management, 77%. Verbal communications, 75%. Employee communications, 68%. And Angela, I don't know if you'll be pleased that it made the list at all or unhappy that it's at the bottom of the list at 67% is research. So,
well, there's actually two there because data and analysis.
That is kind of.
Jim, I totally agree. We need to focus on results, but you don't get to results magically. You have to follow a process to get there. So I do see a lot of value in making sure that we're using the right processes and that they are working. If we don't do that, we don't have any empirical data to say why we're making a recommendation on how to get to that result. Right. But I see data and analytics.
You're speaking to Mr. Lean Six Sigma here, so I understand process.
Right. I just don't want to poo-poo process because that's how we get there. I'm sorry, it sounded like it. So with the data and the research is, the way I look at research is what you do before you develop the plan to make sure you understand what we're talking about with the strategy. And then the data and analytics is to make sure that we are on the track to getting there. And so part of it is some of the skills we need is how do we know what kind of data to go for? And a lot of times it doesn't have to be a survey. It could be like what Jim was talking about with results. You can actually correlate some kind of communication metrics that you have with some kind of business metrics that are out there and say region by region or plant by plant, look what we're finding. We're finding that in the plants where they're doing X with communication, they're getting this better result on the business side. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just looking at a data that's already been existing and understanding survey results, but knowing what to look for that already is out there that we just need to put together from what we know already to what some other department has access to that we should know.
I think there's another dimension to the data and analytics, and that is that we are not well versed in big data, which I know it's jargon and a buzzword, but it refers to these massive data sets that are available to us since everything has gone digital, and being able to analyze that and tease, information and stories out of the data. For many years, Shift Communications, which is a mid-sized PR agency, was the only PR agency that was Google Analytics certified, which means you can dig into the data that you get from the visits to your website and get good information. We talked about monitoring, and Chris Penn, who just recently left Shift, where he was, I think, a senior VP. He's started a data insights organization. And he said, I was able to use artificial intelligence to blast through everything that everybody was saying about this company because they wanted perspective on this one crisis they were having. And what came out of it was we found another crisis they were having that they didn't even know about. So being able to apply the newer tools to this massive ocean of data that's available to us, I think is something that we need to learn to do. Also, in order to tell our own stories based on that data.
But I think we have to be clear on what our role in that is. I don't think we need to become data scientists ourselves, but our role is to come up with those hypotheses, or what are those questions we would like to have answered, and then work with someone who does know how to manipulate the data sets and query them to say, what are we seeing that might support this approach, or so we have to be the ones that have the questions, and then somebody else can help us find the answers through the data.
Right. And I think agencies, especially mid-sized to larger agencies, are going to end up bringing those data analysts on board so that you don't have to job that out. I think it's going to be more and more routine to dig into that data and have somebody who knows what they're doing to help you do that. So anything else on that list that you want to talk about? The verbal communications, crisis management?
Okay, I hate the word verbal communication because it means related to words. It could be both oral and written. So as a communication survey, I'm very annoyed with that particular word. Especially when written communication was an alternative option. So.
Yeah.
I suspect oral communication is what they meant when they listed that as an option. Mm-hmm. But speaking of oral communication, one that's not on the list, and it's a technology, you knew I was going to throw a technology in here. We have to at least begin to understand that we are shifting to an audio communication world where talking to a device is going to be the interface that we use more and more frequently. 1 out of every 5 Americans has a smart speaker, only a couple of years after they were first introduced, and parents and families are the biggest demographic using them, so it's not like it's a high-tech early adopter audience. And there are problems associated with this. There was just a story I reported on my podcast just this week, where somebody asked what a contrail is of the Amazon Alexa and got a conspiracy theory because what the algorithm does is it finds the top answer and reads that back to you. And in this case, the algorithm said, we don't know what they are. It's secret government stuff. And this got reported and Amazon went and fixed it. But how many other things where you're getting this one true answer are not an actual true answer? How do we optimize our content for voice? I think that's going to become more and more important. And how do we deliver content through these tools that more and more people are going to be using when they're seeking answers and information?
Alexa, say hi to Shell.
Hello.
Hi, Alexa.
Well, she did that very well. That's an okay one. Yeah.
I think it really comes back to Mary's discussion about being able to articulate. Who knows what Alexa really understood when the person asked about contrail? They might have not understood she might not have understood the word clearly.
Oh, there had to be 20 YouTube videos that different people shot as soon as they found out about this. They all recorded themselves asking the question. But, I talk about voice tech on my podcast, and a guy who's a communicator, I think is for the Florida Justice Administration, has started doing a daily flash news briefing and getting out to his members that if you add this to your list of news that you listen to when you ask for the news briefings, now you're going to get theirs. I think that's really smart to add that to the mix, to make that resource available and do it now while this stuff is early rather than wait until it's a default communication channel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think the other thing is, again, because one of the things that we see on product development, and we've seen this for at least the last probably 10, 15, 20 years, but we put products out there from the marketing side and they're not quite fully formed, right? I mean, we put them out and very often the product is a capability. It's not a full product yet. And so it's what we often call, we're kind of building the plane while it's flying, and so you kind of look at that, and what that does is, all of a sudden the hiccups are magnified because the plane is in the air and it wasn't quite finished built, and now it's not working, right? But I think that in terms of like even the audio or anything, and I think this gets to that ability to just because we can, should we? And maybe that leads us a little bit more into the ethics side, right? Because I love to eat candy 3 times a day, should I? Probably not, But so I think, and that's really a basic example, right? But I think that that's part of, on the audio side, you start putting voice out there and it can be manipulated. And so you're going to be able to say a CEO of a company said this when in fact, they took words from different statements and put them together. And now it made it look like the CEO said this. So I think whenever you talk about anything that's coming out, whether we're talking technology, AI, or any of those things, I think that we just have to look at the flip side of the coin. And I think what's really good about all of that is that those of us who are communication professionals, whenever we've been involved in project discussions or anything like that, and we start doing our strategic planning and having those conversations, what's one of the key lines that we always say? All right, so we've got this buku plan. This is hunky-dory. Now let's be the devil's advocate. What could possibly be wrong with this thing? We take it analytically, getting back to the data and analytics, and we pop it in the SWOT matrix, right? And then we look at the things that are the weakest and the things that are the greatest threats. And if we can't cover those, then probably we need to go back to the strengths and opportunities and do a little revisit. So again, I think we're going back to some of those core things that we are as communication professionals.
I heard an interview with a consultant. What he does is meets with teams that are about to launch some sort of big initiative. I mean, this might be opening a chain of your retail stores in China or something like that. He gets them very zen, right? Lights down, incense in the room, calm, quiet, eyes closed. And he says, project yourself 6 months into the future, and this project has failed. What went wrong?
I like that. I like that.
Putting themselves out there after it's already gone wrong, that helps to surface, oh, you know what?
Oops.
So,
yeah, the hiccups.
I like that approach. I heard that on a Freakonomics radio podcast. We have about 10 minutes left. Want to invite those who are watching live again to submit any questions. use the hashtag COF32 on Twitter, monitoring, and we'll get those to the group. What skills weren't covered on that list that we haven't talked about yet? And Jim, absolutely agree with you and what we were talking about earlier with the idea that it's not just skills, it's competencies, and there's a difference.
Yes, that's true.
So what else is missing, do you think?
I think because of the ambiguity and the pace of change, I think that, that whole kind of intrapersonal examination, what we might call our emotional intelligence, I think that component has to be there as well. And I'm trying to think if Mary Ann, you were the one who wrote an article, this is years ago, that we used to use in accreditation, how to keep your head when everybody else was losing theirs or something. Yeah. And I can't tell you the number of times the title of that article comes back in my mind, because, I think that the communication professional, the global standard defines a purpose as voice of the organization. I think that communication professional very often is the adult in the room, and I think that you have to be able to be emotionally prepared to take that and to understand what that might mean, and so I think that's a whole side that an individual or a professional can really kind of take that journey themselves, get that personal ethics statement developed, figure out, who you want to be, all of that. How do I contribute and advance a discussion rather than I'm always going to be tearing down and I'm going to be the cynic. So I think all of those, I think, are real important as we deal with a very fast-paced, ambiguous environment that we will see from here on out.
I think one of those.
Go ahead, Angela.
I was just going to say, one of those things that come from the emotional intelligence is we need to have more of a backbone or gumption. Because I think a lot of times we just sit back and complain that, gosh, leaders aren't listening to us. When in fact, have we actually tried to put ourselves on their schedule, call their PA and said, need to talk to these two executives at the same time about this issue that's coming up? That happens relatively rarely. So I think we just need to say, if there's something that needs to be done from a communication perspective that'll help the business, that we have absolutely every right to go forward and put this agenda item on a table, not wait until some executive realizes there might be an issue and calls us in.
Good point.
I think that's the thing that needs to replace what they put on their list and are calling crisis communication. We are sometimes the only adult in the room. And you do have to have a backbone. I'm involved in an issue right now because I serve on a board, and our executive director resigned and gave us a week's notice and figured her accumulated comp time she hadn't taken counted as her 30 days notice. Yeah. And, I stepped in, and not surprising to some of you who know me well, took the reins because everybody else was in an uproar and they weren't willing to slow down and go through the process. And the board chair called me yesterday and said, Mary Ann, I don't know how you can stay so calm in these meetings when X is being so disruptive and so arrogant in her behavior. And just, well, that's just part of my training.
That's right. Piece of cake.
Yeah. I think it is a skill, a competency, not a skill, a competency we do need, because we can't get emotionally attached to issues that everybody else are emotionally attached to, or we disintegrate a discussion from strategy down to tactics.
Yeah, I think that's also part of that strategic advisor role.
Yes.
We can learn to play. Where we understand consulting skills, communication styles, can step back and have perspective that maybe the person in the boardroom can't see. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for communication professionals to teach themselves and to learn how to be much more of an advisor, counselor.
We did get another question. This from Brian Kilgore, and it's a fun one. How do PR people promote food and laundry detergent 40 years from now? I'm going to dismiss the laundry detergent because we'll all be wearing smart clothes to clean themselves while you're wearing them.
Oh, you know those Canadians up there asking those questions.
Those kind of questions. That's right. Yeah.
Hi, Brian.
Yeah, hard to say since we don't know what the channels are going to be and what will resonate with people. It's certainly changing under our feet. And I think one thing when you talk about a competency or a skill that's relatively new is that people are looking to do business with purpose-driven organizations. A company that just makes something and sells it and doesn't contribute to society, especially, I hate to generalize, but the millennial generation, if anything comes out of the data about them, it's that they're purpose-driven. They want to live purposeful lives, and they're looking to do business, whether it's investing, being a customer, or working for an organization. They want that to be a purpose-driven company.
Even the financial organizations are now investing in companies that are becoming more purpose-driven.
So now we have Gen Z coming up behind them, and they're saying, we're not millennials. If you're communicating to us like millennials, you're going to lose us. We'll have, 2 or 3 more generations in 40 years? And what will their values be? And what will the technology channels be like that they're using routinely for consuming information and content and for engaging in conversation? It's just hard to tell.
Well, I think one thing that, and Mary Ann had made the comment a little bit ago where she says the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? And so we used to always say it was think global, act local. And, I think to this purpose-driven organization, you're seeing that local and that social license to operate, because that's, we didn't know whether we were supposed to call it CSR, what were we calling this? Then we kind of sat under sustainability for, the last 5 years. And now really when we're looking at the result, the outcome, it's a social license to operate. And so I think all of that is going to be, key. And it always was important. But when you look at business environments 100 years ago, that's what was important then too.
Right.
So we're just going back to it.
I remember watching a presentation Ed Robertson, the late Ed Robertson, was doing, and he said, you had 4 levels of communication, and you had to satisfy one before you could get to the next. It's sort of like the Maslow of communication effectiveness. And it started with logistics and then attention. You had to get their attention. At the very top was influence and behavior change. But just below that was relevance. And one of the things the technology enables us to do is deliver content to individuals based on what we know about them, and groups of people based on what we know about them. I'm looking at a tool to use here for internal communications where I can send out a newsletter to all employees, but this article will only go to people who work in pre-construction and estimating. So it's knowing how to be relevant, but also how to use the tools to make sure that people are getting stuff that is relevant to them as individuals or teams. And one other competency that I would say is really important is facilitating communication among other people. If the whole idea of communication is to get people on the same page, to have a common understanding at the end of a dialogue, having the ability to help other people engage in that dialogue is important.
Yeah, I think the skill even more tailored. Everything's going to be customized in 40 years. Like you're talking, Shell, about what you're looking at now as a tool. I think that'll be a tool that will just be standard operating procedure in 40 years.
Yeah, I think to Brian's question, what we need to do is, and what Mary was saying is, we need to be doing a lot of reading, a consuming of information, so we can see these things that are developing and prepare ourselves for it. So it's keeping ourselves connected to all of these trends coming from all over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I run into too many communicators who, I've attained this position and I'm done learning. I'm now just executing, and I don't know what could possibly be more dangerous.
Yeah, they have 20 years of experience, but it's the same year over and over again.
Well, we are out of time, so let's just go around very quickly with a concluding observation, and I'm going to go right to left this time and start with, and I know my film strip is not the same as yours with the thumbnails, but Mary, you first.
I think just in summary, I think that you're that continual learner. And I think that where you get your confidence from is in throwing yourself into new situations and seeing how you adapt and move inside of each of those new situations. So I think that's what you set yourself up for. You look at a continual learning model, and then you put yourself in situations that take you out of your comfort zone every so often and see if your head stays above water, and you press on.
Great. Mary Ann.
I think we need to change our title and stop calling ourselves communicators. We're coaches and counselors who our goal is to help those we work with communicate effectively. They're communicating. We're just helping them do it better.
Jim.
I think the biggest thing we need to be doing is helping these communication practitioners, or whatever you want to call them. And I agree, communicators is, my dog communicates. We all communicate, but the key, the professionals that I'm talking about, I think it's very important for their long-term success and happiness that they are focusing on results that add value. And the more they do that, the more refreshing they become inside and externally, the more that they are contributing to the organization, and the more that they can go home at night feeling like I made a difference and I'm valued. But if you're focusing on, I know this is keep drumming this, but activity that doesn't sell beer, you're not going to be where you could be if you're selling more beer.
Angela.
I would just say that on research and measurement, it's one of those topics that there is a lot you can learn. I did write 2 articles long ago that people can find on my website. One is on what research skills you should have at different stages in your career. And the other one is how to become a measurement maven, all kinds of non-traditional ways you can get more exposed to and better informed about research and measurement techniques. So that's www.cinicom.com. And they're free. Just look under publications and then sort it by subject, and then look under professional development.
I will. And I want to let everyone know that our next episode of Circle of Fellows, number 33, will be on Thursday, May 17th at noon Eastern. The topic is CEOs as the new global community leaders, advocacy and values. We have 3 panelists lined up: Amanda Hamilton Atwell, James Lukaszewski, and Ned Lundquist, and a player to be named later. Want to thank Mary Ann, Jim, Angela so much for spending the hour with me, and of course want to thank Anna Willie for her steadfast work in coordinating all of these and making sure everything happens on time. This wouldn't get done without Anna. So look forward to seeing everybody out there in the audience on May 17th when we talk about CEOs. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Shell.
Thank you.